Okay, so in this week's how-to, we're going to cover how to feed your fish. So we're going to cover how often to feed your fish and what types of food to feed them. Okay, so the first thing we're going to have a look at is feeding your fish on flake. Now flake is quite convenient to feed your fish, but not all your fish will take it. And even fish that will take flake will often take quite a while to get used to it. However, if you can get the majority of fish to eat a little bit of flake, it becomes a lot easier if you're going away on holiday. And also, if you're not there a lot during the day, it can be put into an auto feeder so you can get loads of feeds into your fish really quickly and easily. So the first food we're going to have a look at on the flake side of things is Ocean Nutrition's Formula 2 flake. Now this is our default flake, it's the main flake that we feed in store, and I say for most people's general use that's the best of the flakes to use. If you want to vary it up a bit, there's 4 other flakes in the range which are used for specific things. So you can also use, if you've only got predatory fish in there, you haven't got any grazing fish like angels or tangs, you could also put a little bit of Formula 1 flake in there as well. This is without the algae that's in Formula 2, so it's a little bit better and it's a little bit easier to wean more predatory fish onto it. If you've got a mixed tank with variety species like most people have, you could mix this in with a little bit of Formula 2, but I'd still primarily use Formula 2 on most feeds for most tanks. As well as that, you can vary it up with Prime Reef. This is particularly good for smaller fish, it's a little bit more enriched, and we find that small fish really shine on this. You get better coloration and better growth, and if you haven't got any angels or tanks because your tank is too small, then that's the only time really I'd use something other than Formula 2. For everyone else, I'd just blend a little bit in to add a little bit of variety to your feeds. You've also got Brine Shrimp Plus here, which is primarily brine shrimp based flake. It's very rich in proteins and fats and gives you good growth, but it does compromise a little bit on some of the other nutrition things. So I wouldn't feed exclusively on Brine Shrimp Plus, but I would mix a little bit in with the other foods if you want to get the best out of your fish. If you've got a lot of grazing fish, then you also want to consider spirulina flakes. Now this is like Formula 2 minus the Formula 1 part of it basically. So this is pretty much all just dried algae, and it's particularly good for a lot of herbivorous fish. It's particularly important that if you've got things such as various tangs, that you feed them the flake before you feed the frozen if you're feeding both at the same feed. So with things like lipstick tangs in particular, if they're fed too protein-rich heavy diet, that can cause problems with the kidney and liver and drastically foreshorten their length of life. So when you're feeding the tank, always put the flake in first, leave it 5-10 minutes, let those tangs really fill up on the flake as best as they can. Then when you put the mysis or whatever else you're feeding into the tank, it won't eat too much frozen and it won't cause them too many digestive problems. Next we're going to take a look at pellets. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at pellet, and as with flake there's a few options here. We've got 4 different pellets that we can use. Now it's quite difficult to wean fish onto pellet, but when you have got them weaned onto pellet it can often end up being their favourite food. You'll get excellent growth and excellent coloration on pellet, but it is quite messy so it can really wreck your water quality. I say if you've got a lot of sand sifting species, pellet is invaluable for that, and also for feeding inverts because it can sink to the bottom, settle out, and they can scoop it up where it's often ignored by a lot of the other fish. If you feed too heavy on pellet though, you can really cause yourself some major water quality issues, not just with nitrate and phosphate, but also with water clarity. It can be very difficult to maintain water clarity in a tank that's fed heavily on pellet. But having said that, getting some of your fish onto pellet is not a bad idea. If you go away on holiday, pellet lasts much better and longer in a feeder than flake does. It's less likely to clog, and it could be a real lifesaver if you go away on holiday quite often. It's also quite easy to feed on a feeder throughout the day as well, so you can really maximise the growth on those big fish, particularly tangs and rabbit fish that will eagerly eat pellets, and you really max the growth and colour out on them really well. We do 4 different types of pellet. The standard default for us would be the Formula 2 green in the small pellet size. The small pellet size is still quite large, so a lot of smaller fish like scooters and things are going to really struggle to eat it, but most fish will be able to cope with the small pellets reasonably well. The Formula 2 again would be the default because it has quite a high algae content, so it gives a good range of nutrition across the board. If you had more predatory fish and you've got no tangs or angels in there, or you just want a bit of variety, then you could put the Formula 2 small pellet in instead. Now this is without the vegetable matter in, which of course isn't really so important for a lot of species, and also it's often easier to wean predatory fish onto a Formula 1 pellet than onto a Formula 2. And again, you can mix them together. The two pellets are different colours. Once they're in the tank, the fish will pick out the ones they want, whether they go for the green pellet or whether they go for the red in the Formula 1. Now if your fish are very large, like 4 or 5 inches plus, then instead of the small pellet, you might want to consider the larger pellets. And again, they're available in Formula 1 and in Formula 2, and that can be used for really getting better growth on the bigger fish. You'll also find that they're a little bit less messy than the smaller pellets. They don't crunch up and leave quite so many particles. So if you're feeding a lot of pellet, try and get some of them onto the larger ones, and that will minimise the damage to your water clouds. Right, next we're going to take a little look at seaweeds. Okay, so seaweeds are a great way of feeding grazing fish. They can be secured in a clip, or you can cut them into strips and rubber band them to a small rock. It gives grazing fish something to pick out all day long and really replicates their wild diet very well. There's 3 different seaweeds in the range, and I'd say for the majority of species, the green seaweed would be the default one. Some fish, such as emperor angels in the wild, would mainly eat the brown seaweed, and some fish, such as the powder tangs, the powder blue, powder brown, and powder grey, would primarily eat red macroalgae in the wild. So although the green would be a default, you could put a little bit of the brown and red in with each feed and see which ones your fish prefer. They can pick and choose between them and get a good range of different minerals and nutritional requirements that way. I'd still mainly use the green for the bulk of the feeding, but a little bit of brown or red will just help broaden that range out, and you just get a little bit better colour and growth on your fish as a result. Next we're going to take a look at some frozen foods. Okay, so first things we're going to look at are the frozen and the default 3. These are the most popular 3 for feeding your fish, especially if you've got mostly small fish in a typical mixed reefs or 50 to 500 litre system. Now this will cover the nutritional needs of the vast majority of marine fish. It will give good variety, good solid growth, and there's enough roughage in it that you shouldn't get too many dietary problems with feeding a diet that could be too rich in protein, like some of the other more specialised feeds we'll come to in a minute. So the first one of these is mysis. This is a good food and covers the vast majority of species. Almost anything will eat mysis. It makes it very easy to feed, and most things are going to eat it and get pretty good growth and pretty good nutrition. So no matter what fish you've got, unless they're all really big, you want to be feeding mysis at least part in pretty much every feed that you do. The second one we're going to come to is marine mix. Now this is a mixture of mysis and many other foods, and although they are all available individually, and probably for most people it's better to feed them individually, if you've got a very small tank where you're feeding a very small amount of frozen food, then this is a good general all-round food. It's got a mixture of things in it, such as mysis, krill, algae, and will provide a good range of nutrition to a wide variety of small fish. The third one that's pretty much essential for the vast majority of tanks is cyclops. Now although this is a freshwater food, it's very nutritionally complete for a marine fish. It's very good food and it's small, so it resembles the same size, colour and shape as marine copepods. This makes it ideal for feeding fish that are very finicky feeders, such as scooters, mandarins and pipefish, which will generally take cyclops straight off the word go. It's also very useful for feeding to a lot of corals, especially LPS corals. A lot of inverts will take it, and it's generally pretty good food for most tanks, especially if you've got a lot of small fish. So these 3 will form the main bulk of the feeding for the vast majority of people, and now we're going to look at some more specialised feeds for a little bit more variety. So first of all we're going to take a look at feeds for very small fish. So next we're going to take a look at more specialised feeds if you've got very small fish, and these are also great if you've got a lot of mobile inverts. You can also defrost these and mix them in with a little bit of coral food for target feeding those LPS corals as well. Things like mushrooms and the soft world, and some of the dendros and neptias will also take some of these foods, which often have quite a lot of very small particles. They're probably best avoided if you haven't got lots of small fish because they can be quite messy, but in little nano tanks or tanks that are mainly LPS coral, they form an excellent addition to the food. So we're going to have a look. There's a few different ones you can use. You've got microplankton there, we've got red plankton as well. Rotifers are a great food and it's often used to rear a lot of marine fish, the live version, but it's also a good food for a wide variety of small fish. Invertebrate food, which again contains a variety of different foods, and it's sort of the equivalent of marine mix but on a smaller scale. So this is great for small fish or for tanks that have a lot of cleanup crew, especially things like little sexy shrimp and things like that will provide an excellent source of nutrition for them. There's also two freshwater foods here that we use, as well as the cyclops we mentioned earlier. We sometimes mix in a little bit of daphnia and a little bit of black mosquito larvae. Black mosquito larvae is particularly good if you've got wrassers or copper-bound butterflies which feed predominantly on worms in the wild and you're struggling to get them to eat. Because they're quite long and thin, they'll often tempt difficult feeders to start feeding and really start piling that weight on. Next we're going to take a little look at feeds for medium-sized fish. Okay, so for medium-sized fish, and these are fish primarily in the sort of 1 to 3 inch range, you want to be feeding something a little bit bigger than the rotifers and things we mentioned earlier. So to back up your mysis and vary it out a little bit, you can also consider the mysis with spirulina and garlic, which contains all the benefits of mysis and has a little bit of spirulina, algae and garlic in there for a little bit better nutrition. Garlic has to be used in moderation, so I wouldn't feed too much of it. And it doesn't really have any effects on infectious parasites as well, so don't think it's going to help you out if you have a white spot or any other problem in your tank. That needs to be sorted with a copper medication and a quarantine system. Other things to look at would be brine shrimp, which is an excellent food for getting weight on fish and is quite easily digestible. It also makes a great food for a lot of larger LPS corals, such as the euphyllias. However, it is quite protein rich, so feed with caution a little bit, especially on grazing species such as tangs. Again, you can do a version of that with the spirulina and garlic in as well, but again, I'd rather be using a Formula 2 flake to get much of the spirulina into them. If you've got a lot of tangs, it's worth including a little bit of this in the diet, but don't go too crazy on it. Marine fish eggs is an excellent food. It provides a lot of nutrition, is really good for weight gain, and either small or very large fish would snap these up quite well. It's particularly good if you're trying to get a fish into breeding condition because it will contain all the elements that they need for producing eggs themselves. Fish which primarily feed on eggs in the wild, such as many anthias and cardinal species, will snap these up with absolute delight. And it's a good food to have to vary out from the basic mysis as your main food. Chopped krill superba is another one that you can use. It's a little bit messy, but for fish with hard beaks, such as dwarf pufferfish, it's quite good because it contains a lot of nutrition in it for helping to grind their teeth down and keep their teeth in good shape. And it's also very good for a lot of shrimps as well, because it will contain a lot of the elements that they need for construction of their exoskeleton. Next we're going to have a look at foods for fish in the sort of 4 to 8 inch range. Okay, so the next one we're going to take a look at is marine quintet. Now this is 5 different foods all sealed into individual cubes. So it's got basic foods in there for smaller fish such as brine shrimp and mysis, but it also contains larger foods such as krill pacifica. This is ideal if you've got a range of fish sizes within the tank from quite small to quite large, because they can pick out which ones that they want, and you can also use this as a staple and then bulk it out with a little extra mysis or a little bit extra krill, depending on the size mix of fish within your tank. The krill is also particularly good if you've got a lot of dwarf puffers or shrimps, where puffers can grind their teeth down on the shells to stop overgrowth, and also it provides a lot of nutrition for shrimps to grow an exoskeleton. So it's a great food if you've got a wide variety of sizes of fish in your tank, but if you've got mostly larger fish, then you're going to want some larger foods. Krill pacifica is a good standard food. We use quite a lot of this in store, and even fish that are quite large, pushing at a foot, will take krill pacifica quite well. Small fish are going to really struggle though. it's got a hard shell that some fish are going to find hard to break. So you use it mainly for the larger fish and they'll get pretty well with it. White shrimp is another great food. They get to a fair size, up to 1.5 inches long in the packet, but because they're quite thin, even fish with relatively small mouths for their size, such as many wrasses, can eat it quite nicely. You get a little bit of mess with it, but it's not too bad. It does smell a bit, so you have to live with the smell when you're defrosting it, but it is a pretty good food and pretty popular with most larger fish. Now, squid is a fantastic food for large fish. This is packed full of proteins. It's got a lot of essential fatty acids and aminos in it that really pack good growth onto the fish really well. It can be quite difficult to wean fish onto squid, but if you can get them on squid, then it's the only thing behind lance fish that's really going to get you that top level of growth. If you really want the best growth, squid, lance fish and pellet is the ultimate triple combo for getting by far the best growth on your fish. Next, we're also going to look at chopped cockle, which is pretty straightforward to explain, and chopped mussel as well. Now, both of these are quite messy, so use in moderation and use as a treat or an occasional food rather than as an everyday food, but they're a good way of adding a little bit of variety to the diet. Next, we're going to look at foods for very big fish. Okay, so for very large fish, the one that we use primarily more than anything else would be Krill superba. This is a great food, it's not too messy, it's got a lot of hard shell in there, so predators really enjoy crunching down on it. It's got a lot of nutrition in it, and it's a nice clean way of getting a very good variety of minerals and vitamins into the fish relatively easily. Most things will take Krill pacifica, whether that's all the way down to little dwarf lionfish, all the way up to foot-long groupers. So it's very easy fish to feed, it covers a wide variety of sizes and works really well. You can spice that up a little bit with whole cockle and whole mussel. Now, both of these are very messy. Out of the two, I favour mussel rather than cockle. More fish will go for the mussel, although it is a little bit messier. If you're feeding a lot of this type of food, you might try and wean them more towards the cockle, which is a little bit less messy, but it's a little bit harder to get fish to take it to start with. After that, we then go on to the bulk foods that we do. We do two different ones. Cockle in the shell, which is an excellent food, and these are cockles inside whole shells there. Now, they are a little bit of work to prep because you have to take the cockles, defrost them in a little jug of tank water for 10 minutes and then pry them open. Now, sometimes they can be a little bit difficult to pry open and the edges can be sharp, so you need to watch your fingers a little bit. But they're an excellent food, and the weight of the shell holds the food in place so fish can pick at it all day long, which is particularly good if you're away a lot of the day. You can pop some in the morning and they can scavenge throughout the day. And big, really big fish, if you've got puffers in the sort of 9-inch plus region, or very large triggers, are able to crack straight through the shells without you having to pry them open for them. And this can be an excellent food as well. It does mean that you have to go round and net all the shells out the tank every now and again. But if you're using a really fine sand, like the Bahama sand that we use in store, then with a coarse net, the sand will slip through the net quite easily, leaving all the shells behind. The most popular food, probably for large fish, would be TMC's whole fish. These vary in size a little within the pack, anything from 1.5 inches up to sort of 4-inch monsters. Most big fish relish these quite nicely. Even normally herbivorous fish such as tangs will devour these quite easily, and it's one of the best ways of getting a lot of growth on the fish very quickly. If you are feeding a lot of lance fish though, watch out for an oily film on the surface, and either use heavy skimming or heavy aeration to break the film up if you need to. Next, we're going to have a look at my favourite food at all, clam in the half shell. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at clam in the half shell, and this is probably my favourite food to feed in store. Absolutely brilliant food. It's like the cockles that we saw earlier that I said were difficult to prep, except all the work's been taken out of it for you. So the cockles have been sawn in half, and each half has got a wet piece of shell with the meat still attached to it. You just pop 1 or 2 in your tank, however many you need, first thing in the morning, and the weight of the shell will hold the food in place so the fish can pick at it all day long. A wide variety of fish like to feed on these, even from small difficult feeding fish such as scooters and cleaner wrasse, all the way up to large predatory fish such as like the big 10-inch sweet lips we have in store. They all devour these quite readily. It's an excellent way of getting nutrition into the fish all day long when you're away, and if you're going on holiday, getting someone to come in once a day and pop a couple in the tank is a good way of getting a lot of food and really stretching out that feeding period. It's great food, it's got a lot going for it, and we feed loads of it in store. Next, we're going to take a little look at some of the more specialised feeds that you also might want to consider to get the very best out of your fish and take them to the next level in terms of coloration and growth. So lastly, we're going to take a look at Ocean Nutrition's premium range of foods, and these are a bit more expensive than the other foods we've already covered. But these are enriched with a lot more vitamins and minerals, a little higher range of ingredients, and just a little bit better than their standard foods. So the first one we're looking at is Prime Reef. Now this is primarily, as with the Prime Reef flake, aimed at small fish and provide an excellent job of feeding fish in a nano or a small to medium reef tank. It's quite finely chopped with a wide variety of foods, provides excellent nutrition for small fish. The cubes can be a little bit large, but if you find they're too big, just carefully cut them in two. Usually a bread knife is a good way of doing this, and you can feed half a cube at a time. In the same theme as that, we've also got Formula 2 in frozen food, and also the Spirulina in frozen food as well. These are good backups to the flake food, and some people use them quite a lot. I must confess we don't feed a huge amount of them in store, but if you're quite heavy on your tangs and you really want to get the best from them, they provide an excellent source of food. For more difficult angelfish and other sponge eaters such as Moorish idols, they do the specific angel formula and also the pygmy angel formula, which contains sponges within it to get the very best out of your angelfish. It's particularly important with deep water angels such as regals and multibars, or fish with very specialised diets like Moorish idols. You're going to get much better long-term longevity by feeding a sponge-rich diet than you are by just feeding primarily standard frozen. And also, if you've got triggerfish, it's also worth looking at the trigger formula, which also has sea urchins in it, to again get the very best in coloration and growth out of your triggers. Out of all the premium foods though, there's one that stands head and shoulders above all the rest, and that would be super shrimp. Now this is primarily brine shrimp, and then it's enriched with a huge variety of different vitamins, minerals and fatty acids. It provides a huge stimulant to growth and is a massive appetite stimulant as well. It also contains other chemicals like taurine, which really attract fish's attention and get those finicky feeders feeding really easily and really strongly straight from day one. If you find that you've got a fish that you have a difficulty getting to feed, or it's feeding but not feeding enough, try putting a little bit of super shrimp in the diet and you'll notice a dramatic improvement in how much it eats and how often it eats. We feed a lot of this in store when we've got new fish in and we're coming in straight from the wild. We'll often take super shrimp, having turned their noses up at anything else we've already offered them. Absolutely fantastic food, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So if you've got a small mixed tank with mostly small fish and a varied variety of diets, then you can primarily get away with feeding Formula 2 flake, mysis and a little bit of Cyclops to cover the vast majority of the feeding. But to get a little bit better results from your fish, try broaden that out with a lot of the standard foods that we mentioned. Things such as fish eggs, a little bit of squid here and there, and a little bit of extra variety such as things like the marine mix and the marine quintet. Will really broaden out their diet, get much better growth, much better coloration, much better behaviour from the fish. If you've got larger fish, there's a huge variety of larger foods to look at. And although a lot of people feed primarily on pellets on larger fish, do consider a lot of the larger frozens, which will be a lot less messy than feeding a primarily pellet-based diet. If you really want to get the very best out of your fish and get that very top-notch show quality colour and growth, then really you want to be hedging towards using a lot more of the premium foods such as the super shrimp and the specialist angel formula and Formula 2 frozen. you're going to get really exceptional results, and you can sit back feeling pretty happy that you're providing the fish with the best diet you can possibly do. Thanks for watching this how-to. Make sure you check out our website www.saltyrevolution.co.uk. You can also check us out on Facebook and on YouTube just by typing Salty Revolution into the taskbar, and we'll come straight up. Make sure you like, subscribe and follow so you can see all of our updates and don't miss out on all of our future videos. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again shortly.